I see BFSA as a caucus, and that means that it's important that people of color who are faculty and staff at the University of Alabama be connected.
It's a great place to get started on campus. So for any new professional, new to campus, whatever that may be, I think it's a place where you'll find a range of experience as far as work experience. There's some new professionals in there, and there's some folks who've been here 30 plus years.
Really, it's a chance to connect with folks who know what it's like to be Black and here at UA.
One of the biggest thing would be the opportunities that it presents. A lot of things that I would not have known about in campus if it wasn't as a result of my membership with the FSA. So just having that connection, having people of like minds, people who care about the same issues as you, and just working with those people, getting the opportunity to learn about events on campus, getting the beneficial to you.
Hi, I'm Allison Rand. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm a BFSA ambassador. So we act as the liaison between the actual BFSA faculty and staff and the student body. BFSA is one of the best things that I got myself involved in on campus because, like I said, it's helped me with a lot of my self-confidence. It's helped me to become more involved, to meet more people, to gain more opportunities for mentorship, and to gain more opportunities just to put myself out there and to prepare myself for the real world.
The BFSA Scholars, I think, is the program that I would point to as one of the most beneficial. They're doing some great work, helping our students for our scholarships, getting organized, getting plugged into the community.
I've been a supporter of Black scholars, from the beginning and precursors, and currently trying this year in particular, trying to support ambassadors both with time and financially. Kind of things we support, speakers, all those things. I think for faculty and staff, making sure that there's just general things to do and things of interest for people to get together around. So those range, but I think all those things are beneficial.
BFSA, because BFSA is family. It really is. It's a means of family here on the University of Alabama campus.
Being in BFSA is about being connected and collaborating to support students of color and to support all students in their success. I'm excited to be a part of the organization. Yeah, I'd like being able to support the university and do things that help the university grow and develop. And BFSA is just a good outlet for doing those kinds of things.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Chad Jackson, and I am the president of the University of Alabama Black Faculty and Staff Association. We have Mr. Andrew Pernell as our guest today, as you were able to see in our media. I'm going to turn the meeting over now to Dr. Cassandra Simon, affectionately known as Cassie, who is the vice president of the Black Faculty and Staff Association. Cassie, welcome everyone. Everyone welcome Cassie to the program.
All right, Chad, thank you. I want to take a minute to say that I've had a couple of conversations with Mr. Pernell, and I am very honored to be able to be the person to facilitate the telling of his story. It touched me, reading his book touched me in many, many ways. And you'll probably hear some of that, whether you want to hear it or not. My name is Cassandra Simon. I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work here at the University of Alabama. I have been here a good while, and I so very much appreciate Mr. Pernell allowing us to share his story and get his story out. Also on the call, we have Dr. Art Dunning, who has a long history with the University of Alabama. And I know he doesn't remember me because I was a mere babe at one point when he was brought back, and I had just started under the Office of Community Affairs, a journal called the Journal of Community Engagement and Scholarship, and you received a Community Engagement Award from the Office of Community Affairs. And we met then. I just didn't know who I was meeting. So isn't it amazing that Dr. Dunning and Mr. Pernell have a history together? And this story, let me just say, and I don't know if Dr. Dunning is going to talk about that at some point. This is going to be the format we are going to use is Andrew Pernell is going to tell his own story. We had some conversations to see whether or not I would need to pull his story out. And after receiving his book and talking with him, it was clear that I was not going to need to pull his story out, that he can share his own story. So we have a format set up where he will share part of his story, and then we'll ask a couple of questions, and then he'll share the rest of his story. And then we will ask a few more questions and open it up for questions from the audience. For those of you who are watching on Facebook live, you can just put your questions in the comments, and Mr. Chad Jackson, our president, will be looking for those. And those of you watching on Zoom can put your questions in the chat box. And this story, let me just, Chad Jackson, our president, will be looking for those. What was that? Okay, was that me? But yeah, he'll be looking for those as well. And so let me introduce to you briefly, per his request briefly, because it will be part of his story, Mr. Andrew Pernell. I'll give you a little background. Mr. Pernell was born in the basement of the segregated Bessemer General Hospital in Bessemer, Alabama on January 19, 1948. Mr. Pernell came of age in the 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. He attended the segregated Robertstown Negro Elementary School in Bessemer. After completion of elementary school, Mr. Pernell was bused to the all-Black Brighton High School in Brighton, Alabama, to continue his secondary education. While in high school, Mr. Pernell participated in numerous marches and sit-ins in the Birmingham, Alabama area. Mr. Pernell excelled in both academics and football. He and 4 other young African-American males attended the University of Alabama and were the first African-American football players there. And their story is often not told and told incorrectly. And this is part of what Mr. Pernell is going to be addressing. He is married to a beautiful woman named Chelsea, and they have 3 sons, who one wrote the foreword to his book, and it is absolutely beautiful and poignant. And his son is as prolific a writer as he is. Mr. Pernell, let me just say that I thoroughly enjoyed your book. I started putting tabs, and you can see I started having so many tabs for the areas that were important to me. It's like a tab on almost every page. And I have things highlighted and things written in the corners. And so I'm just excited for people to hear your story and then be able to run out and get your book, because it is amazing to me and so uplifting. Much of it resonated with me. Let me also say that I don't know if Dr. Dunning would mention it or not, since this is about Mr. Pernell's story. But he also has a book coming out in the latter part of May called Unreconciled: Race, History, and Higher Education in the Deep South. And from what I have read about it, it too will be an interesting story. So without any further talking from me at this point, I give to you, Mr. Andrew Pernell. Chad, I need you to unmute.
Let's see. I'm waiting on him.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
He's muted.
He's
Yeah,
coming.
he is muted, but Chad's it, yeah.
Mr. Pernell, can you unmute your computer, please? I think his wife is going to get it for us. Thank you so kindly.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can now. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay. General delivery. Andrew Pernell, football player, University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, 35486. Tampa, Florida, 1967. Dear nigger, color stars not wanted at Alabama. In other words, haul your black ass north. Signed, VC Botticelli. Now, this was one of 4 hate letters that I got while I was at the University of Alabama. And what I'm going to share with you tonight should be filtered through and the other comments that you've heard and what has come to be accepted. Just filter those things through these 4 letters. There'll be some other filters for you. So information that you received in the past may not be as accurate as it ought to be. But I came to get some I thank Brother Chad Jackson, President of the Black Faculty and Staff Association, and Dr. Cassandra Simon, likes to be called Cassie. I call her Dr. Cassie tonight. And I thank all the members of the association for inviting me and wanting to hear my story. And you guys have been so receptive. And I thank you for this golden opportunity. And I thank Mr. Ken Gaddy, the director of the Paul W. Bryant Museum, who's also been so receptive to what we're trying to do. And he has made it known that he wants to put my book in the Bryant Museum for some period of time. And I certainly appreciate that. Thanks to Elder Sherelle Joe, one of my church members, one of our family friends who made the connection between me and Mr. Jackson. And it's just a godsend to be able to get back into the university proper and tell this story from what my story was birthed from. And I certainly appreciate that. And I thank my wife, who has been by my side and pushed me to get finished with this book. I'm a great procrastinator. And so she's been pushing me, and I finally did it. Her name is Chelsea T. Pernell, and Dr. Arthur Dunning, who's on the line. I thank him for being here with me as corroborating evidence to some things I might tell you. And my oldest son, Brian Andre Pernell, who wrote the foreword to the book. I understand that some people say he did a great job, and I was impressed. I didn't know he could read and write. And to the audience in general, like I was saying, I'm going to fill some gaps and correct the record concerning the integration of sports at the University of Alabama. I am presenting to you this evening a New Testament. You come to accept certain things as gospel, but I am an eyewitness and participant in the events of which I speak. And I will add this disclaimer: the opinions that I express tonight are not necessarily those of the University of Alabama or the Paul Bryant Museum or the Black Faculty and Staff Association. So the first part I'm going to talk to you, it'll be a lead up to the football experience. And in the second part, after we have the interview questions, will be about the climate, the football climate and the climate in which we live today. I'm a slow starter, so with the pandemic, I haven't talked to people very much, and I kind of out of practice with talking. So, but I should hit my full stride in about 10 minutes. So just bear with me. This evening, I will not be talking to you from a position of placation or appeasement, or a place of minimization or sensitivity. The hour is late, and we don't have time to play patty cake. I will not sugarcoat a bitter pill. Those who swallow the sugar-coated pill never gain a true appreciation for the bitterness that lies at its core. I'm going to give you some operational definitions. And I'll let you, well, let me just give you these operational definitions. I divide whites into white folks and white people. White folks are those who pull against Black people at every turn just because we're Black. White people are those who are empathetic and sympathetic to the concerns of Black people. So I'll give you some names out, and you can place them in the white folks category or the white people category. I will offer up to you Ron DeSantis of Florida, Greg Abbott of Texas, Brian Kemp of Georgia, Kevin McCarthy, Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Mitch McConnell. There's some Black people too that we're going to give honorary membership to tonight. And there's a host of them, but I'll just talk about Herschel Walker, Ben Carson, Clarence Thomas, Lil Wayne, Diamond and Silk, Kanye West. As one writer said, they are skin folk, but not kinfolk. So I'll let you do the categorization as to who goes in what group. Now, there were 81,009,468 people who voted for Joe Biden. 74,111,419 who voted for Trump. And if you do the math, that's about 7 million more people voted for Joe Biden. But yet they still talk about stop the steal. So there was a writer that wrote a book. It's called Useful Delusions. And it helps people to go about their daily lives. And I would submit that a lot of white folks have trouble going about their daily lives if they don't have this thing that they can rally around, which is that the vote was stolen. They have no evidence that the vote was stolen, but they're going on what Trump said. And we know how he lies, and they've joined in. So it's a scary time in America when you can just tell a blatant, bold-faced lie with no evidence, and they don't want any evidence. They just want to follow that because that helps them out as they try to make America great again. And on the other side, white people would be people like Biden and Sherman and Goodman, Pelosi, Lyndon Johnson, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Rachel Maddox, and some more people. So you can put those into the categories that you would like. Like Dr. Cassie said, I was born in the basement of Bessemer General Hospital. I remember seeing the pipes across the ceilings, the sewer pipes, the water pipes running across the ceiling in the basement. And that's where Black folks were housed when they were in the hospital. I remember that when I went back years later to visit, I remember seeing those pipes. And that was like a metaphor for future life of Black people being born in the basement. And from there, it was an uphill struggle for the rest of a Black person's life That's the way it was meant to be. And as Dr. Cassie said, I came of age in Alabama in the 50s and 60s. I was born into segregation. Everything was segregated. The waiting rooms, hospitals, restrooms, cafeterias, churches, schools, you name it, everything was segregated. And during that time, all whites addressed blacks by their first name, no matter the age of the white person or the age of the black person. I attended Robertstown Negro Elementary School. A lot of my friends probably don't even remember that. I remember it so vividly, I can still see the sign. It was about 10 feet by 2 feet proclaiming Robertstown Negro Elementary School. And I went to school for 4 hours a day from 1st to 6th grade, either 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 8 a.m. to 12 noon or 12 noon to 4 p.m. And part of that time was standing outside lined up, facing the flagpole, pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. How hypocritical is that? We got secondhand textbooks. We could see that in the textbooks where the school that had them before us, the white kids that had a stamp in them, we would get them. And everybody in the textbooks all the characters were white except the dog Spot. Everything else in the textbook was white. In my 7th grade class, there were 70 students in my 7th grade class. After graduating from Robertstown, Robertstown went to the 7th grade, 1st through 7th grade. 8th through 12th grade, I was bused to Brighton High School in Brighton, Alabama, another city. Couldn't go to the white high school, the Bessemer High School in Bessemer, my own city, but bused me to another city. So the busing was all right for us. But at that time, white folks were adamant about they didn't want their kids bused. But one person said, it ain't the bus, it's us. And I understand that, just like with the Capitol riots, the insurrectionists on January 6th. I remember this one guy vividly with the helmet, banging on the door to one of the rooms at the Capitol. And he was banging, he was beating the hell out of that door. I had never seen anybody beat anything so hard. And I was thinking, it's not about the vote, it's about us. That was about us. Played football when I was in high school. I was a quarterback, led my team to the Jefferson County Championship game in my senior year. During my 10th grade year, civil rights organizers would come to the various schools in the area, Black schools, and encourage the students to leave the school, find a ride or catch the bus to the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. So our principal was a very strict principal. And we were surprised that he didn't say anything. With his tacit approval, him being silent, we were surprised at that. So we were allowed to go and not be expelled when we came back. A lot of us, including myself, went on a frequent basis. We left school and traveled to 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. And at the church, the organizers would give us instructions, tell us what was coming up next, and tell us about the marches and sit-ins and demonstrations that were planned. And we would sing songs, Which Side Are You On, Boy? We Shall Overcome, and they ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. In 1963, I organized the first sit-in at McClellan's department store in Bessemer, Alabama. There were 2 lunch counters, one for whites and one for Blacks, and they were out of sight of each other. So one day I got 3 of my friends together and asked them to come go with me and sit in at McLeod's quiet lunch counter. And they agreed. And we walked downtown Bessemer, about 2 miles away. And we walked in, the counter was about half full with patrons. And we sat down, they got up. The cook / cashier behind the counter, white, she said, "Y'all don't belong here. Y'all eat over there." She was mad as hell. And I said, "I want to eat here." And I placed my order. I ordered a strawberry shake. I'm not sure what my other friends ordered, but we were never served. And I could hear the white men behind us say, "They don't belong here. Let's get them up." And we had not considered what we would do. We were naive. We were like 15, 16 years old, but we had not anticipated what we would do if we were attacked. And I learned recently while writing the book, there was another group of Black teenagers who went after us, but they got credit for going before us. They were beaten. We weren't, so it didn't make the news. Since we didn't get our order, we, after a few moments, we started walking out the exit door. And as we were walking out, 2 white policemen were coming in hurriedly towards the white lunch counter. So we walked calmly out the door, but as soon as we had hit the door, we split up and scrambled out of town as fast as we could go. And when we got back to our neighborhoods to reassemble, we laughed, but it wasn't a funny laugh. Sometimes that's the way we handle things. I'll just give you a backdrop leading up to my entry into the University of Alabama. In 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson allowed segregation in public schools. In 1952, Arthur and Lucy enrolled at the University of Alabama. They found out that she was Black. Immediately, they expelled her. 1954, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The Earl Warren Court ruled 9-0 that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. And they moved the order that the schools be desegregated. 1955, Montgomery Bus Boycott. So this is what was happening. Blacks on the back of the bus, whites on the front of the bus. So about midway through the seats, there was a sign, one sign. On the front of the sign was white. On the back of that same sign was colored. Black people were forced to come to the front door, put their money in the coin device, get off the bus, and walk to the back and get on. Isn't that funny? 1956, Arthur and Lucy re-enrolled at the University of Alabama. And the University of Alabama officials said that they expelled her, said she created a riot. Arthur and Lucy created a riot and she was expelled. And it's like saying George Floyd murdered himself. He was the cause of the murder. There was a very pivotal case in January 1963, but wasn't decided till 1967, and that was Lee versus Macon County Board of Education. And the court ruled that, 3-judge federal panel ruled that all the primary schools, secondary schools, 2-year colleges, and universities be desegregated. And this was in Alabama. The school was in Tuskegee. It started out with Tuskegee High School, but was expanded to include all the schools in the state. June 11th, 1963. George Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door at Foster Auditorium. His lips dripping with interposition and nullification, as Dr. King said. And this is what the governor, George Wallace, said while he was standing in the door. The unwelcomed, unwanted, unwarranted, and force-induced intrusion upon the campus of the University of Alabama today of the might of the central government offers frightful example of the oppression of the rights, privileges, and sovereignty of the state by officers of the federal government. Wallace was advocating white rule to keep Blacks in a plantation-like environment. He had on a suit and tie, but he should have had on a robe and a hood, been more fitting for him. That very same day, U.S. Deputy Attorney Nicholas Katzenbach came back with about 100 federal troops, demanded that Wallace step aside. Wallace did. And Vivian Malone and James Hood enrolled in the University of Alabama that day, June 11th, 1963, at Foster Auditorium in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. The very next day, white supremacist Byron D. LeBeckwith shot Medgar Evers in the back, ambushed him, shot him in cold blood. Medgar Evers, a civil rights activist and leader in Jackson, Mississippi. August 27, 1963, the March on Washington, where there was a grand march for social justice and economic justice. That very next day, August 28, 1963, Dr. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. 2 weeks later, September 15, 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed, killing 4 little Black girls. That was the church where we had our mass meetings in that very same year, and it could have been us. On July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. March 7th, 1965, Bloody Sunday, Edmund Pettus Bridge. State troopers used billy clubs, tear gas, horses. 2 weeks later, on March 21st, 1965, the Selma to Montgomery March was successful. And let me tell you this about the Edmund Pettus Bridge, symbol of the Confederacy. Edmund Winston Pettus was a former Confederate Brigadier General, U.S. Senator, and Alabama Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. See, these old symbols are rooted in slavery and segregation and hatred. August 6, 1965, the Voting Rights Act passed. President Johnson, a Southerner, signed into law the Voting Rights Act. And we see right now how we are under attack as Black people, our vote. And all these states are doing all they can to suppress our vote. And it's atrocious. It's so in your face type thing. But you know, we as Black people, we see all these things. We may not have power now to do anything. We have probably more power than we think, but they have all the power and they are using it. They're using a strong hand, but we see that, and that goes into our psyche as to how we deal with things. And there'll come a day that the shoe will be on the other foot and they will ask for mercy and tolerance, which they are so intolerant now. Changing gears, I understand that the University of Alabama now is doing a 50-year celebration of John Mitchell and Wilbur Jackson. John Mitchell was the first Black football player to play a varsity game for the Crimson Tide, but Wilbur Jackson was recruited in 1970, but he was relegated to the freshman team because the SEC rules said that freshmen could not play varsity football. So I had heard about Wilbur Jackson and John Mitchell, but I never followed Alabama football after I left Alabama because of the way I'd been treated. And it was a long time before I could cheer for the Crimson Tide, a long time, many years. Like I said, I didn't even know these players. I might have heard their names, but I was not into Alabama football at all. And Ken Gaddy was so gracious to send me some video of those days, and I could see that they were awesome football players, and my hat is off to them. Now, I was a member of the Afro-American Association during those days, and I was a plaintiff in a lawsuit filed by the Afro-American Association in 1970 to force Bear Bryant and the University of Alabama to integrate its Crimson Tide team. So don't think that 1970 and 1971 just happened without some pressure. Without Genesis, there is no Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy. Without an acorn, there is no oak tree. Without a tree, there is no forest. You don't begin a novel starting with chapter 2. So tonight, I'm going to introduce you to chapter 1 in the sports integration story at the University of Alabama. I, along with 4 other Black players, walked on to the Crimson Tide football field in 1967, in the spring of 1967. And I continued on the team until the fall of 1968. The other players after the spring game were gone. When the spring game came around in 1967, there was just 3 of us left: Doc Rome, Jerome Tucker, and me. So I stayed out to the fall of 1968, and I'll tell you that story shortly, what happened there. And so the first 5, we were intruders in 1967. People who came later, and the earliest was 1970. Well, Wendell Hudson came in 1969 as the first Black basketball player, but he was recruited. He was on scholarship. So we were intruders, and therein lies the difference in how our stories unfold. And I don't dispute the stories of any of the invitees. They had their experiences, and I don't want them to dispute anything that I say about as an intruder, because my story is true. And I assume their story is true too. So I wish not that my story be discounted. It is, let me just tell you this. So a lot of reporters have said that we were pioneers, the first 5, a lot of stories that I read. So, and I like what dictionary.com says about a pioneer: a person who is among those who first enter or settle a region, thus opening it up for occupation and development by others. Now let that soak in. In an online article dated June 6, 2012, titled "The 1967 Walk-Ons, the Forgotten Pioneers of Alabama Football's Integration," writer C.J. Schexnayder says this: "Until now, The presence of these 5 African-American athletes on the Alabama practice field has been seen as an outlier in the story of the integration of the football team. The narrative instead focuses on the offering of the scholarship to basketball player Wendell Hudson in 1969, football player Wilbur Jackson in 1970, and the 1971 Alabama versus USC game that saw John Mitchell take the field and at long last cross the Crimson Tide's varsity football color line. He goes on, yet, while the importance of these events cannot be overstated, neither can the contributions of the Black walk-ons that preceded them. In a paper I delivered at the North American Society of Sports Historians Annual Congress last week, I argued that there was a confluence of powerful factors in the spring of 1967 that finally forced the University of Alabama to take action. And he continues, thus the presence of the 5 walk-on players at spring training was more than just another milestone on the way towards integration. It was the crossing of the Rubicon, a point of no return. So I want to share my experience with the registrar. So I was working in Detroit the summer, trying to find work in Detroit after I graduated from high school, tried to find work for the summer. And I traveled to Detroit with one of my teachers and 3 other students. And my mother called me and told me she had gotten a letter from the University of Alabama saying that they had not received my transcript, even though we sent the transcript off in April. So I traveled back home to Bessemer, my guidance counselor from high school, and I drove down to the university and hand-carried the transcript to the registrar. So when I get there, registrar comes out, he says, well, your grades are not as good as the rest of the students, the white students, meaning. And so let's go back a little bit. So I went to school, I was a part-time student for 6 years. Overcrowding 70 students in my 7th grade classroom. Secondhand textbooks. So now the registrar wanted to compare apples to apples when his system had created apples and oranges. But I submit that both apples and oranges can thrive if they get the right attention and care. Malcolm X said this about that. They crippled the bird's wing and then condemn it for not flying as fast as they. And the other thing the registrar said is that I think you'll be happier somewhere else. Well, I'm thinking to myself, I didn't come to the university to find happiness. And needless to say, I didn't take his advice on either account. I graduated in 4 years with a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Relations, they called it at the time, Business Administration. Received my MBA from Western International University in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm currently a doctoral candidate for the Doctor of Management degree from Phoenix University. I have a 3.92 grade point average. So oranges can thrive too. So my father and I drove my mother down to the university for me to enroll. And my father helped me carry my trunk up to my room. And I could see, when I opened the door, I could see that I had a white roommate. His back was turned, he was sitting in his chair facing the wall, and he never moved. Kind of like a roach on the wall, and you turn the light on and they just stand still, so maybe you won't see them. But I saw him. So I went back downstairs to see my mother and father off back to Bessemer, about 43 miles away. And so I came back up to the room and he was gone. So I piddled around in the room for a little bit and I walked over to the soup store and I picked up some items, supplies, And when I came back, he had hauled ass. There was no trace of him. I don't even think CSI could have found a trace evidence that he was ever in that room. In Safford Hall, one of the older dorms where I lived, I lived on the second floor. There were 2 rooms on either side of the landing and a common restroom to the back that you would be facing coming up the stairs. And Arthur and Jerome lived on one side of the landing. I lived on the other side. And there were 2 white students, Sam and Ted, and I still remember their name. They were cool white dudes, and they never presented a problem to us, and we never presented a problem to them. We had them outnumbered, but even if we didn't have them outnumbered, we weren't the type of Negroes to put up with any foolishness. Patty Hall at meal times. So Patty Hall was a newer dorm for men and probably the largest dorm, as I recall it. And it was the only dorm that had a cafeteria in the area. So all the other dorms came to Patty Hall to eat at meal times, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And whenever a Black student would get his tray and try to find a seat, it was always crowded every meal. And if he found a seat, an empty seat at a table with white students, the white students would jump up and go to another table. And some students, they would be so mad that they would take their tray up to the conveyor belt and storm out of the cafeteria like they were on fire. And I wish they had been on fire. So sometimes we milled around in the hallways, and there were some whites that we kind of fraternized with in the hallways at Patty. And we were talking one day, and this guy from Michigan, his door came open, and he had this wall-to-wall Confederate flag. So we inquired about that, and he kind of played it off like it wasn't a big deal. So after that, we didn't have much to do with him. So this is what I would say. I wrote this: let's get rid of all the flags, statues, songs, and emblems that have racist, offensive undertones and origins. Let's be considerate of our brothers and sisters' feelings. And I noticed that you guys, I believe you still have the Heart of Dixie on your license plates. So as a Black man, I was ashamed to drive around. I had my big afro, and the Heart of Dixie just neutered the statement that I was trying to make with my big afro, Heart of Dixie. Dixie was birthed out of a slavery context. And you can ask me about that later, about Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon and the demarcation line between Pennsylvania and Maryland. But let's not knowingly hold on to artifacts that are rooted in slavery, hate, and denigration just because the thing has been done so long now that now it has become a tradition. Not all traditions are good. This is a news flash. The Alabama intramural football program integrated before the Crimson Tide did. Matter of fact, in 1966, I was on our dorm team, and we played against other dorms. And those dorms and ours had Black and white players, and there was never any hint of racism when we were playing football. So it took the Crimson Tide a few years longer to catch up. So I share this with you. One Monday morning, it was sunny, warm in May, I believe. And nobody ever sat to the side of me on either side or behind me. And so I kind of like sitting in the back of the class for some reason, but anyway. So I was sitting there, and business law teacher came in, an old white man, And I can't remember his name because I will certainly give him credit because I am handing out credit tonight for deeds done. The deed has been done and it can't be undone. So he was sharing with the class before class started that he was working in his yard so hard that it came a point that he was sweating like a nigger on election day. So the whole class laughed. And the humor escaped me. I still couldn't figure out what was so funny, but they all laughed. And I thought about it, more recently, is that they knew how hard they had made it for Black people to vote. Black people had to risk their lives and go through all kinds of things, just like with the march to the Capitol in Montgomery. Horses and billy clubs and tear gas. So, like I say, a lot of times that's how white folks deal with egregious things. They laugh about it, and that's the response you get. I guess that helps the conscience when you know you're wrong. We used to go up to Stillman College for respite. There was no social life on campus. Stillman College was a Black school, a few miles from the University of Alabama. So there was a Black Crimson White school newspaper reporter, Bailey Thompson, and he was interviewing Dean of Men, John L. Blackburn. And Bailey was asking him about social life for Blacks on campus. Could anything be done, I guess, because it was non-existent. And Dean Blackburn said, if Black students think the University of Alabama is a party school, they need to go to a Negro school. It was Negro at that time. So I was Dean of Men. And later I had discovered that he had risen to his stature at the university had risen above Dean of Men. And he was an important person for the University of Alabama. And so the University of Alabama, some officials in the writing said this about him. In 1963, his dedication to progress and meticulous planning were credited as key elements in the historic peaceful integration of African Americans into the capstone. Now that dog won't hunt. Same person, but now we see how he's viewed, but there's a history. And see, we write our history every day. This is part of the record. This is in the record, and we should be careful about that. We make history every day. And then when we die, it's a record of all those things that we did. It doesn't start with when you started doing good things. That's part of your record. So let's do good and right in season and out of season. It's always, like Dr. King said, it's always right time to do right. And so I beseech you, let us do right in all seasons. And that's the first half of my talk.
Let me just say, first of all, thank you for that, for setting the context for the rest of your story. I think that one of the things that I love the most about your book is that it is authentic. It is your story. You make no apologies for your feelings and your reactions to your treatment and even in where you are now and how you got there. I think so often we as Black people try to pretend as though we are not as hurt and damaged in some ways by the things that are done to us or not done for us as done for others. And you said it earlier when you said about it being in our psyche. It doesn't just go away. It continues, right. And we carry that. And so I'm trying to be cautious here because I've read the book and there's so much, like I could sit and talk with you forever, I think, about if you really unpack all of what you said in your book. It is very personal. It is scholarly in some ways, and then you come around and you are sharing the tidbits of our culture, like the laugh that we do or the looks that we give one another when we know what's going on.
Yes.
You do all of that in your book. You give hints to our vernacular, with no shame, which is one of the things I love. You can tell, like, you hear me talk anywhere, you can tell I'm an old Southern girl, and then I have the Louisiana twang, and for years was taught to be ashamed of that, and now have embraced that. But so when I find Black folk who are not ashamed of our vernacular, that's just one thing that resonates with me. And you work that in there, and you have so much wisdom in this book, that I love the fact of some of what you're going to do next. It's something that I find many people are not willing to do. I call it calling out. You call out some people who did some things.
Yes.
But you see, when we talk about calling out, most people view that as negative. You call out the people who did some negative things,
Yes.
but you also call out the people who did the positive things, who did the right things when it wasn't the time. And so I'm so anxious to talk to you about the urgency with which we must handle these issues. But that's the latter part of your book. Let me ask you this in terms of the first part and what you've talked about. I'm just curious, as you talked about the hospital and what that means, it reminded me of an interview I did with a group of people from Mississippi on colon cancer several years ago. And they talked about, and I think you have something like, make reference to this in the book somewhere, the same kind of thing. I love the way you ask the questions too. Okay, because they were talking about them still going to the doctor in Mississippi, where there are very few doctors, in some of the rural areas, and they go and they see white people come in after them who get seen before they get seen, and they're too afraid to say anything because they're afraid of how that is going to impact their health care and what may come. And people think that these things are like long gone and in the past, but I know they're not. My husband, for one, is terrified when we go to the doctor's office and we've been waiting there like an hour past our time, and I'll get up and say something, and he's always, when it's his appointment, just be quiet, wait until after they see me, because if you say something. And so this is current day, so I just like, and a lot of the stuff is still present that we've talked about in the past, and so I just like a quick reflection on that from you, and how much have the things you talked about changed and stayed the same, and what do we do with that? And I think in the book you question Dr. Somebody, because you make reference to a doctor who
Yes.
was doing, yeah, maybe you can tell that story, but you ask about him. Yes, please.
Yes. Okay, so that's in my book. So I think this might have been the only doctor in Bessemer that wait on Black and white patients. And so the doctor's office was segregated. Blacks on one side, and we were colored then, and whites on the other side. And I wondered, in what order did Dr. Terry call his patients? like you were saying, people who came after you were waited on first. So the same thing like then made me wonder, since everything else was like it was, what is there that would make me think that we would be called in the right order? There was nothing in during those times to make me think different. So, and yeah, that's one thing with the, it's just like, don't argue with the, with the cook when you go
Right.
to a restaurant. You don't want to do that. That's not strategic. It might make you feel good, but the outcome might not be very good for you.
I love that you referenced in your book also, though, now since you brought up food, you talked about people not wanting to sit with you in the dining area and stuff. And you go through this whole analysis though about, but did they not realize who was preparing their food?
Yes,
And
yes.
the difference and you want to just say a little bit about your
Yes,
awareness
yes.
about that?
So Black folks that had their hands in their food, on their utensils, in the preparation process. So there's another social dynamic that comes into play when you sit down to break bread together. So it's like, oh, hell no, we can't sit beside you because that's the rule. Somebody made the rules and we gotta, if we're saying sitting beside you, then, we might be brought down a notch. So segregation is funny that way. It's when it's convenient for us to cook the food, prepare it, then you can put your hands in stuff that go in their bodies. But when it just comes to sitting next to a Black person, no, can't do that because, those are the rules. And it's just so, in 5th grade, I wrote an article when I was at Robertstown Negro Elementary School about the ridiculousness of 2 water fountains, 2 restrooms, colored and white, 2 of everything, 2 waiting rooms. I remember at the bus station, white waiting room, colored waiting room. Yeah. So.
When you talk about segregation being funny and different, and it reminds me, and like we could not sit together, or people didn't want to, and we still in many ways have that same dynamic going on, just at a different level. It's almost like we still know. I equate it and make an analogy to us knowing that some of the more overt forms of racism are no longer present, but that we know that there are still things going on. And so
Yes.
that reminded me of social desirability, and this whole notion of, okay, you're acceptable, but only to a certain degree. Once you start getting
Right.
too close to me socially, then we have to disconnect. And hence why many people still don't want their young white females to be with Black men, especially. It's like you can be their friend, but don't bring them into the family, and so
Right.
social desirability has something to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of like the Royals, with Macon, wanted to know what color skin tone he might have. That became a question.
Right.
But it's just, the whole thing is so ridiculous. If you have some sense and some social sense, these things just seem so outrageous to you, where people have this construct that was from slavery, from when America started. And I talk about it in the book with who exactly is white. is some nationalities that come over, they call them the new immigrants. The first immigrants were coming from Germany and England and the Scandinavian countries. And so they established rules. And they, like when the Italians came and the Greek came, they weren't considered white. They were called new immigrants. And there was one famous, I guess he was a sociologist or historian, and he said that, if they, talking about the new immigrants, if they clean themselves up and do well, then we may accept them in a generation or two into the white family. But they were in between. And a lot of people don't talk about Al Capanis and Jimmy the Greek from back in the day. And they're Greeks, but they said some things about Black folks that you wouldn't expect somebody who's been treated as a non-white. They weren't considered white, that's it. They were considered non-white in an in-between state, but they had the opportunity to clean themselves up and do well in society. And then they might be accepted, and so now they're accepted. But what the new immigrants had to do, they had to be accepted into the white society of the white America. They had to show their disdain for Black folks in an exaggerated way. So the whites would invite them in. So now you become acceptable. And this is what Richard Pryor said back in the day. He said a Black cop had to do more. He had to whip a Black person's head worse than a white cop to show that he was one of them.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing I love about your book. You use you share your ideology, your beliefs, your thoughts, but then you support it with things from both the past and then more contemporary things as well.
Yes.
And I mean, there's everything. I mean, you're even up to George Floyd in here, in the murder of George Floyd in the book itself, and connecting that to all of these things about what you're talking, the intra-group dynamics, the intergroup dynamics, along these racial, quote unquote, racial groups that we have constructed, that society has constructed. And I just love the fact that you're doing that. I think, I mean, I'm a social worker, and I could see using this book in social work too, because social justice and oppression, anti-oppression class, and this fits with a lot of that. I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm going to let you start, because a lot of people are probably interested in your Alabama football stuff. But I want to say, first, one way that I had never thought of it. Now, I've always known about white and Black families, but in your book, and so since it was at the beginning, I thought I'd just include this, because I was like, oh, wow, all this time that you've been studying race and race relations and all of that, you never thought of it that just outright and simply. And it was having to do with the, well, first of all, I fell out laughing when you talked about the policy man coming. I remember the policy man coming out. Actually, the policy woman just stopped coming to my mom's house about a year ago.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a big deal going into those neighborhoods, collecting, that money.
Nickels and dimes.
Right, that if you would have saved that, you would have had more than that life insurance policy.
Right.
But but when you talk about the different ways in which we refer to one another, so that whites are all, take the they will refer to us and assume that it's okay to call us by our first names, but always call the other white person back then by their last name. And would you share your reason for that, for saying that? I had never thought of it like that before.
Oh,
even though I knew that went on, I know that happens. We have that in our family, so.
Yeah,
But I had never thought about the how you reference people being connected to that.
okay. So, yeah, that's funny. And I didn't know if anybody would really get that, but
Oh, I got that.
so like I say in the book, no matter the age of the white person or the black person, the whites called blacks by their first name only. My mother was Mary, my daddy was Leslie, and little white children would call them by their first name. And so what you were alluding to was that in the book, so we used to have this white policy man, that's an insurance man for people who don't know. And he would come by every week and collect the premiums. It would be like a nickel, dime, maybe a quarter. I just remember a nickel, dime number. And so he came one day when I was home from university, and he asked me where I was married. Now, he's about my age at the time. I was probably 20. And so I schooled him about calling my mother by her first name, and I never saw him again. So what I was saying about the last names, I was saying, suppose the white folks call my mother by her last name is Pernell. And then in that community or close by, there was a white Mrs. Pernell. So I kind of left that hanging as to, what you think about that type. So did the white Pernells own the black Pernells? That would have been like a direct connection, and you wouldn't have to do ancestry.com or anything.
So as we move into you going to Alabama and playing football and the things that happened. How about we set that up? I have a very close friend, and we were friends for 12 years before I even knew, down in Texas. She lived in Texas when I was there. She was actually an associate dean for me. But her name is Shirley Wesley King. And her sister, she's actually somebody I consulted with before I moved down here. When I got the job, I had never, it's hard for people to believe this, but I never heard of Tuscaloosa.
Mhm.
I had never heard of a Crimson Tide. I did not know what it was.
Mhm.
And they came in and recruited me to come down here. And so long story short, she grew up in Birmingham. And so I was like, now you know how I am. Do you think, this is a place that I should be going? Because, you hear Alabama and everybody has that same kind of reaction.
Right.
And she encouraged me to move down here. But her sister was Cynthia Wesley, one of the 4 little girls killed in the church bombing.
Right.
And I talk about those feelings with Shirley because very much like you, she could have been in that basement that day, and she has a story about why she wasn't. But so you've had all of these experiences, you have all these feelings. There are these things, going on in society that are right, the things that are not right. We have some of the same dynamics today where the Black students who choose to go to predominantly white institutions are critiqued for doing that, rather than going to HBCUs. You talked about some of that in your book. So I'm saying you're dealing with all of this as a young person, and you decide to go to the University of Alabama. And what, you and Dr. Dunning and your other friends are just playing football? So do you want to get into that story now?
Yes.
About the rumor, about and all of that?
Okay. So, like I said, I played football on a dorm team, and this was probably 1966 when I was a freshman. And one day after a game, I was over near the practice field where the Tide practiced. And so I walked over, and they had the privacy covers up on the fence so nobody could see that, you know, what the Tide was actually doing. So I peeped through the privacy covers and looked for a little bit, and I said, I can do that. So it wasn't so gargantuan of an effort to that you might think when you don't see a thing that's being done, and you know, it's just like I guess going to the moon. You can't see how that could happen until you see it, and you know what is made up of. Then you can buy into it. And that was something that I thought I could do from watching them practice. And at some point, the five of us, I think might have been the four. See, Doc Rohn, he's the one of the five who asked permission. He wrote Bear Bryant asked for permission to come out and for the team. And the other four of us, Doc lived across campus from the rest of us, and we didn't have that connection like we did, because three of us lived right across from each other. And the other player, Melvin Leverett, lived in another dorm in our area. So we decided to walk on. And that was Melvin Leverett. He started at fullback. He was a big guy. He's like 6'2" through 230. There was Doc Rohn. I think he was like 5'8", 5'9", 185 pounds, they say. And there was Arthur and Donnie and Jerome Tucker and me. And that made up the first five. I played flanker, moved to flanker from halfback, and so did Tucker. And I think Arthur was at halfback also. But Melvin looked like the prototype. He and Doc, football players. The rest of us were just, like so-so. But sometimes the physique, and it doesn't, it belies, what a person can actually do. Then the thing is courage. If you have courage, if you're undersized or if you have a desire, you can make it. That's been proven time and again. But we idealize. We want the tallest basketball player, the biggest football player, and those things. But a lot of times, those people you might find sitting on the bench. I remember when I was playing high school football, we saw these two huge guys. They, we were like, oh, look how big they are. But they never got in the game. They just carried the water cooler into the stadium and out. So we walked over to we made up in our minds. I don't know what the conversation was. I don't remember that. But we walked over to the locker room in the field where the Tide practiced. And we walked in, the locker room was noisy like all football locker rooms are. And when we walked in, it became dead silent. Everybody just looked at us. I understand that Coach Bryant had basically told them, don't mess with us. And nobody messed with us, but they were looking. And so we saw Coach Goostrey, the trainer, and he was so matter of fact about it, and he was a good guy. And I tried to contact him when I was writing my book to give him his props. And I found out he had passed away a few years earlier. But, you remember people like that. It wasn't the season, but he was so matter of fact that, you didn't really see any difference in how he treated, any of us. He just, so we told him we wanted to play football. He took us over to the infirmary. We got our physicals. And we passed our physicals, came back, and he gave us our equipment, and we began playing football. There are some stories that the four of us, except for Doc, had to be clear academically. And Arthur and I don't remember that. We've talked about it, but it's like, why check our grades? We're already in school, and But anyway, that's the story that we didn't start when Doc did, and we don't remember that account. But so there was one game I came close to suiting up for. The coaches came around and asked me my size apparel that I wore, my cleat size and so forth. But as quickly as that came, it went. I didn't hear any more about it. I had called my parents and told them I might be playing on Saturday. And, but you know, never happened. There was one guy, Ken Stabler, quarterback, star quarterback for the Tide, went on to play for Oakland and I think New York and maybe another team or two. But he would always greet me. He'd always say, "How about it, Pernell?" And so he put an I on the end of my name. And my name on the roster was always Pernell. We had a roster each day and you'd see which team, you check the roster out and see what team you were assigned to that day. We were on the scout team. And we scrimmaged the varsity team before the, like if they were playing Tennessee this week, we would scrimmage to run Tennessee plays. So he was a good guy.
Do you mind if I ask something, Mr. Pernell? Because you're about to go through, I think, if you know, looking at what you're about to go through, you're about to address several people who impacted your experience at Alabama. Just want to ask you why you chose to do that before you even start to talking about them in different ways.
So I've always said, I always tell my wife, I want to give people credit for what they do, whether it's good or bad, how I was treated or not treated. And like Representative Clyburn said, I'm past the promise. I'm 73. So what you gonna do with me? And I like to expose people. So I didn't have enough time. And I wanted to, and I still may do it, but not for this book, put names to pictures where you see all the hate in the crowd, just like at Central and Arkansas back in the day, and things that go on now and the insurrectionists. Let's get a photo and put a name with it and preserve it for posterity. Exactly. So your kids, your grandkids can see what side you were on and see if that makes a difference, but I don't think it will.
You know, one thing you reminded me of something, and I know I'm supposed to let you tell your story, and I will be quiet and let you do that. But you asked a question when you were talking about that in your book, about you wonder about those individuals years later, you know, yes, and where they are now and what they're thinking and stuff. And I just want to tell you, I remember when I first came here, I heard a story about the guy who was the he was over the fire department in Birmingham when they were hosing all the children marchers and everything. And just so happened his grandson ended up being a student at Alabama. And one of my colleagues in social work was telling me they'd gone up to the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, had taken a class there. And they got into a conversation about that, not knowing that that was his grandfather. And I'm just saying this is where it gets difficult for me at, because she said that he said that what their family story is that it broke his grandfather's heart. It tore him up. He would go home and pray and ask God for forgiveness and cry at the dinner table and all of that. And I get, and maybe that's something we can talk about later. I get so conflicted between this whole, I understand you being scared, black or white, it doesn't matter, or any other race. You know, I understand you being scared, but you wanting to receive the benefit from the sacrifices others have made if you're, you know, a person of color, black, but you're not willing to sacrifice anything. You're not willing to, as you say, disrupt the status quo and question, and so, and question the whole idea that I think, what do you call it? I talk about it just in terms of whiteness being the norm. What is it? The gold standard you talk about.
Mhm,
So people
mhm.
who don't question that, but are steady moving up and benefiting off of what others have sacrificed, but they won't. And so I get caught between this, okay, feeling sorry for them and being angry at them. You know?
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
and so I'm sorry I interrupted your
That's
story,
okay.
but we can talk about that later because that's really important for my
Okay.
salvation, I think. I don't know.
Okay. All
So
right.
anyway, but I had asked you why you were talking about the people you were talking about, Ken Stabler.
Mhm. Yes. So I like to give everybody credit. And these are some notable names and some memorable experiences that I had, whether good or bad. It happened. The deed has been done. There is no undoing. So Ken Stabler, I talked to him. I did a symposium in November 2011. The University of Alabama History Department, Friends of History, had the symposium was called Black and White and Crimson. And so the first Black in each sport at the University of Alabama was invited to this panel to talk. And I said that I brought up Ken Stabler's name. I gave him credit. I called his name out. So did I call Mel Moore and Bell Bryant out too, you know? So, and Ken Stabler called me out when I got back to, well, we were traveling from somewhere coming back to Ohio. And I was, you know, I was in the shock that he called me and had my number. I don't know how he got it, but he, so I was asking him about how was, you know, he wasn't like the others. And he said, I'm comfortable around Black people. I grew up around Black people. So, you know, people fear the unknown. They have ideas about us. And then those ideas that they have about us, they're usually negative. And they kind of put those things together and say, yeah, this is how they are. So that was one of the threads that ran through some of the interviews I did, was that the ones who had exposure to Black people, whatever role it was in, they weren't as standoffish. We weren't the boogeyman. You know, we were just, you know, whoever we were. So I gave Ken Stabler credit. And I think his, you know, speaking to me, and you would know this, Doctor, with a person of perceived high standing can associate with, speak to a person of perceived lower standing, more so than, we're talking white people now, whites of a lower standing can't associate with people of a lower standing, but it's acceptable for Ken Stabler, star quarterback, to speak to me in that way. And then here's a freshman walk-on, he can't associate with me because that's the rule. So, Coach Mel Moore, I said that he was a racist. And he was a student, not a student coach, but a young coach when I was at Alabama. And one day I had my ankle wrapped, I had sprained it, and I was running a play and I slipped. And he came and got in my face, not up close, but he said, if you can't stand up, you need to get from out here. You know, that scowl on his face. And I can, you know, we are, as Black people, we are able to read, you know, because we got to know who's friend and who's foe, and we have to size up quickly. So I called him a racist, and because Jerome Tucker, you know, so this wasn't in isolation. Jerome Tucker's one of the first five. I was sharing that story with him, and he said, yeah, man, Mel Moore, I put on the wrong colored jersey one day, and Mel Moore made me run suicide drills. And Coach Bryant saw him, and Coach Bryant scolded him for abusing him. and said Mal Moore turned big red. So I give Coach Brian his props. You know, it's often talked about in some of the, like Keith Donovan in his film 3 Days at Foster, talks about Bear Bryant offering Doc Ron a ride. And I say, but this is more telling that he would stop the abuse of this Black player from this white coach. And that means more to me than offering Doc Ron a ride. White folks used to offer my mother a ride after she had cleaned their house all day and then babysit their children at night, and they'd offer a ride home. And so that's the way I take that. And there was another sports person, I think it's Ray Glyer, reporter, used the same anecdote about Bear Bryant offering Doc Ron a ride. You know, big deal. I mean, what does that prove? But, and I never called Coach Bryant a racist. What I said about him is that he could have done more than what he did sooner than what he did. He didn't ruffle any feathers with the powers that be. We saw a lot of pictures, I did, of him with George Wallace, staunch segregationist, and with John Patterson, who was the governor of Alabama also. And, but, you know, just that picture, you know, but I never called Bear Bryant a racist. And but a lot of people take issue with me because we want our heroes to be without blemish, but it is what it is, you know. So I'm just calling it out so it won't be whitewashed. And this is the way it was. Now, I believe in people changing, and there's something in the book that tell you that he said he had to change. So that, I mean, it speaks volumes, but it comes from his mouth as one of his players reported what he said. And Coach Bryant had so much reverence when we were in team meetings. If a coach didn't hear what he said, he had this low monotone voice and Southern drawl. And if they didn't understand him or hear him, they would ask each other, not him. They never asked him a question. It was always, they whispered to each other, what did he say? What did he say? And then there was Sam Gillistead, a player. He hit me harder than any player since I ever played football. But he knocked mucus out of my nose. And but he came to me in private in the locker room one day. I don't think there were that many people in the locker room. And he came up to me and he said, y'all is just as good as we are. If my daddy knew I said that, he'd kill me. And we had never spoken. And I appreciated what he said. But I already knew that what he was saying was true, but I still appreciated and the courage that he had, even though it was in private. And I started not to put his name in print, but I interviewed him a few years back. And I thought that his dad might still be alive and that he might still kill him. So he gave me permission to put his name in print. Dennis Holman, he was a wide receiver back in the day. And so he was being interviewed by a news reporter and about accepting Blacks on the team. And he said, you know, he would accept them if they were qualified, could make the team, but he didn't have to buddy around with them. So when I first saw that, I kind of took the whole thing as negative, but on second thought, I thought that that was some courage for the time to say he would accept Black players on the team, you know, if they were good enough. But so he was for desegregation in a sports sense, but not integration in terms of a social setting. Isn't that funny? So another one for you, Dr. J. Jefferson Bennett. This is a case of the mild-mannered Negroes. So Dr. Bennett told the St. Petersburg Times that we asked permission to walk on. And no, we did not ask permission to walk on. And I think also said they encouraged us to walk on. Nobody ever encouraged us to walk onto the Alabama football team or to walk onto the University of Alabama campus. I'm not aware of that, but that was totally made up. We never talked to Dr. Jefferson Bennett, Dr. J. Jefferson Bennett, but this is, this might come under in my book under the revisionists and those who want their story to, be better. They didn't ask us. We didn't ask permission, and we never talked to Dr. Bennett. And I'll end this not what I'm going to talk about, but there were a lot of reporters around when we were out in '67. I mean, a lot of reporters, and they didn't just dwindle away. They stopped like in their tracks, and they came no more. One day it was maybe just throwing out a number 20, and the next day and forever there was 0. And I found out later from reading some of the material from Bear Bryant about him that he had not asked, but told the reporters not to come back, and it was for our safety. And I remember, when in the 70s, I graduated in '70, but during that time we had the big afros, and a lot of the schools wanted to not permit afros because it was for our safety. So they were always concerned about our safety. You have to give them that. So the way this thing ended, assistant head coach Sam Bailey called me into his office one day. I didn't know what it was for. And he said the school had found out that I was on an academic scholarship, and that the SEC rules said that a player or student could not participate in athletics on an academic scholarship. So he gave me a kind of a Hobson's choice. I could keep the scholarship and leave the team, or I could stay on the team and give up my scholarship. And I needed that scholarship to stay in school. So it really wasn't a choice. So I left the team. And when I left out, I was thinking free at last, and felt like a heavy burden had been lifted. And I was thinking that I didn't know I was carrying the burden that I had been unconsciously carrying the boarding passes for all of the other Black athletes who would follow later and wanted to ride the Crimson Tide. There was an article in the St. Petersburg Times said we were not athletic standouts, and my retort was that he didn't know any Black athletic standouts. We lived in different worlds, so he wouldn't know any. So he was concerned with our chances to make the team, and all we wanted was a chance to make the team. And you can see in Appendix A in the book, in Bear Bryant's deposition, that we were, he was talking about me in particular, that I was had some potential. In 2015, and go right along with that, in 2015, A Club recognition, I received an award voted on by all the members of that A Club committee, and it said to Andrew Pernell for outstanding contributions to athletics. And, I cherish that. And Dr. Sanderson, I give him credit, he spearheaded everything. And he gave, I just got a note, it's kind of threw me off. Where was I? Oh, the A Club. So I spoke, Arthur was there, and Doc Ron was there, and I was there, and each of us spoke. And what I basically said to the audience was, why, Dr. King, why must the moral arc of the universe be so long? And why must it be an arc? And why must it just bend towards justice? justice is the right thing to do, to give in season and out of season. I guess this is what my wife wanted me to say about Mel Moore. So Mel Moore called me after I got back from the 2011 meeting. And he said, Walter Lewis told me I should call you. And he said, I didn't know you felt that way. And I said, yeah. He said, why didn't you come to me? I said, I didn't know I could come to you. You know, I thought you'd be the same person you were when you in my face. And he said, well, you know, we were both young and I had a lot of pressure on me. And he said, well, next time you're in Tuscaloosa, come see me. And, but he passed away. I told him I would, but I don't think I would have because I put his name in his book like I did, but he passed away before I could make the trip, not long after we had that discussion. There was an article in the St. Petersburg Times says that each day they scrimmage, share lockers, and drink fountains with 150 white teammates, and not a single voice around the state has been raised in protest. And that's not so. Now, I read that hate letter to you at the beginning of the webinar and all those other things. In that social context, that social mix, that doesn't even seem probable that not a word has been, you know, raised in protest. And that's just so disingenuous. And I don't know where the writer got that from, but we didn't share lockers anyway. We shared the locker room. And in case in point, there was one player who came up to me at the 2015 A Club Awards Day. And he said, and by the way, Nick Saban and the whole committee voted us unanimously into the A Club to become honorary A Club members. So this guy came up to me. He said, I'm whatever his name was. And I know his name, but I'm not going to use his name. But he said, I had a locker next to yours. And he was introducing his son. This is, you know, Andrew, and, you know, how fast were you? And, you know, all this stuff. And he had never said a word to me. It had been like 47 years. And he wanted me to remember him. So that flies in the face of this, this article in the St. Petersburg Times that each day they scrimmage, share lockers, and drink fountains with 150 white teammates, and not a single word or a voice around the state has been raised in protest. So this is what Robert Kennedy said. And I think this guy, we would have been friends. We could have been friends. But this is what Robert Kennedy said. Few men are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a scarcer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet it is the one essential, vital quality of those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. He had that constructed, contrived pressure on him not to be civil, to be human, to associate with me. And he didn't have that moral courage. Now it's more convenient and acceptable where he can come up to me and say, yeah, 47 years ago, I had a locker next to yours and I didn't speak to you. Now I talk about the revisionists, the defenders, and the judge. I'm looking at the clock here. I may have to cut me short a little bit. I said there was a tendency to rewrite history. Bear Bryant was portrayed as a great integrationist who always worked behind the scenes. Filmmaker Keith Donovan came out to the house and filmed me for his film 3 Days at Foster. And he did not include my less than flattering comments about Bear Bryant. The unflattering part was that I said he could have done more than what he did and did it sooner, but that didn't make it into the film. And I was disappointed in that. And that's why I'm calling out his name today, filmmaker Keith Donovan, 3 Days at Foster. And I went down all the way down to Alabama to see the film on his first showing, and I was disappointed that he didn't include what I said. He came to my house and all of that. So that's why I put his name out there. He too said that Brian offered Dr. Ron a ride. Everybody, that's what that's working behind the scenes, I guess. Then this reporter here said that Glyer, he said, Brian started a gradual push to integrate the program with Ron in '67, while segregation of George Wallace was governor of Alabama. But that's not so. Dr. Ron contacted him. We walked on ourselves. So a gradual push. And this is what Dr. King said about gradual. Somebody asked him in 1957 if he was a gradualist. He said, I think the word gradualism, especially as it is used now in the South, I think gradualism is so often an excuse for escapism and do-nothingism, which ends up in standstillism. And I think there's I talked about the fierce urgency of now. Now I use an analogy in the book, like if you're not in the burning house, you're good. You're not as concerned about people who are in a burning house. So if you're in a burning house, you want fire department to run all of the traffic lights and stop signs and speed limits and come and rescue you. So that's how we feel. And I hope we do feel that way. Like, how long? How long? It's when, and usually Southerners are so slow to change. And for Black people, we don't want to make them uncomfortable or ruffle too many feathers, and, because they're not comfortable yet. So, we have the authoring Lucy Tower, I think it is, at University of Alabama many years later, and the Vivian Maloney James Hood Plaza, I think I got that right. And it took a long time for them to come around, and at least they said they were sorry, but the deed was done, and there is no undoing. And this is what Dr. King said in his letter from Birmingham jail. He said he was gravely disappointed with the white moderate who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. Well, we don't want to, just like with Governor Wallace, it was, he wanted to keep that like keep us on the plantation in Alabama, like didn't want outsiders. They used to call them outside agitators coming in and upsetting what they had built and constructed, and it was working just fine when Negroes could go to their own schools and whites go to better schools and all those things. Let's see, we probably got like 15 minutes. I can I'll stop here. You guys, well, let me just do one thing and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Cassie. I'll have some more stuff, but I won't do it now. Read the book, and I think you will like it. Talking about I Can't Breathe, that's next to the last chapter in the book, talking about George Floyd, and it's so apropos and timely for what's going on now with the George Floyd trial. The Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. So I wouldn't be surprised if Derek Chauvin got off, because that's the kind of the history of these things. All you need is one. I remember the George Zimmerman murder of Trayvon Martin. And there was one juror, I think it might have been, I used to remember the number, but that one juror disagreed with everybody else on everything. She gave George Zimmerman every benefit of the doubt. And we may run into one like this, but I hope not. Everybody has seen that killing. And I still get tears in my eyes. Sometimes I can't watch it. And they've shown all of these different angles and how he was killed. So there's some rioting going on in Minnesota now. Another young Black man was killed in a traffic stop. And the white officer said she thought she was shooting him with her taser, and she shot him with her gun. And see, Black folks, we're tired of that. Everything. And the police chief believed her story. Oh, she just mistook her taser for her handgun. Now they both resigned, the perpetrator and the police chief, which is a good thing. But they always get the benefit of the doubt. And what I like about the aftermath of George Floyd's killing in May 25, I think it was, of 2020, was there was a mixed multitude in the streets. My heart was gladdened to see all the young white people. I guess there were some older ones too, but they felt our pain and heard our cry, things we've been saying all along. And it's like things we know, but they take a different, the officer thought he was going for a gun. That's been used so many times. The officer, feared for his life. And then in the George Floyd murder case, the defense is trying to paint the crowd as a mob. Not only a handful of people, 2 handfuls on the scene. Nobody has bricks and weapons or anything. They're just pleading for George Floyd's life. And I'll just say this. So one day I was sitting in my office, and which overlooks the parking lot, and I saw this hawk sitting in the middle of the parking lot. And I was wondering, why is he just standing in the middle of the parking lot? And on closer observation, I saw that he had a small animal in his claws, and he was snuffing the life out of this animal. So when I discovered that, I immediately dashed down and out the door and, to shoo the hawk away. The hawk grasped the small animal and flew to a further location and resumed the killing position. And so, so if I think that enough, think about an animal that I don't even know what kind of animal it is, to take that initiative to go and stop this killing, then think about George Floyd and the people around. And what happened, they felt helpless and they are traumatized. But Black people are traumatized in this country anyway. James Baldwin said, if a Black person, I think he used the word Negro, is halfway conscious, he wakes up every day in a rage because of those things like that. And we hear, white folks always give their whites the benefit of the doubt, every benefit of the doubt. Well, he must have been doing something. They wouldn't just kill him, but they do. And that's all I say.
I'm sorry, I was taking a breath because I'm feeling all of that. I am feeling all of that. I want to say thank you. We'll see if anybody has any questions. One thing I do want to share with you, though, so that as you, and it's probably stupid for me to do this, but I always do stupid stuff because I think you're right, getting history right is the right thing to do. And I just want to be sure that you know that that clock tower and that plaza that is there is not there willingly.
Okay.
There was a fight to get that put there, and I know because I
To be
was
expected, yes.
involved in it. Yeah. You remind me of somebody who lives by the adage of I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees.
Yes.
And it takes courage to do that. And I know that John Lewis like kind of reignited the term courage, but it is something that I have always thought about, what makes some people willing to take a stance and take the risk and lose something themselves. And I mean, you still can lose some things that may be meaningful to you by telling this story, you know? And so I appreciate
Yes.
you doing that. When I read your story, I told you that I cried at one point.
Yes.
And so there's two things I want to emphasize about that. Toward the latter part of your book, when you're talking about when you let your sons go to the game and you know, y'all had gone to the practice field and it was a LSU Bama game, and you saw all the, you know, young players going in there, girlfriends dropping them off for the game and stuff, and you wondered, do they know who I am? Would it, or some, you know, would it
Yes.
matter who I was to them? Do they know who I am? You know,
Right.
and decided not to say.
It's frozen.
You talked about, and then this is what got me, because I think I see something that is similar in us. You and I don't remember the exact part of the book. It's in one of these mini tabs, but it's where you were talking about why you feel what you feel to the extent that you feel it. And I am often, I think, misperceived as being that angry, you know, kind of person, but I'm also the person who is willing to put myself on the line for others. And it is because I care so much about my fellow human beings and
Right.
about
Right.
the world in which we live, that it opens me up to a great deal of pain. And so I
Yes.
like you were talking about the feeling, the intensity with which you feel. And that comes out in ways sometimes that people don't appreciate. Did you want to say anything, or did I misconstrue that, or did you want to?
Um,
Because that's when I really started crying, when I read that, and then one other part. Now that's what I'll close with, unless somebody has a question.
yeah. I feel things, social injustice. If I had a calling, I would say that would be to fight. I started a sit-in when I was 15. Financed the sit-in, but didn't have to pay any money because they wouldn't serve us. But it's always, you know, I mentioned in 5th grade, I wrote an article on the ridiculousness of the separate facilities for Blacks and colors at that time. But it's been in my bones, and I feel these things intensely, as you say. And so I'm not worried about any, you know, repercussions. I have courage and conviction and character. So I refuse to be denied. And the reason I went to the University of Alabama, because I knew they didn't want me at the University of Alabama, but I had a right to be there. I'm a citizen of Alabama. That's my home. I don't need to go. I had a scholarship, 4-year scholarship to Knoxville College in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I asked my dad, you know, we were poor, but, you know, I told him, you know, got the scholarship and I go to university, you got to pay for it. So he said he'd do what he could, and he did. And that's why I went to the University of Alabama, because I wasn't wanted. And so, and sometimes you have to take a stand. Why not? Just because somebody made a rule, and I always heard, you don't belong here. But you may not want me here, but I do belong here. And that's why I endured the things that I did. And what I thought about years later was that I wouldn't do it again because of the impact that it has had on my life. The stuff that's up here, and
I
it
know
stays
that.
up there. And I do want to see the lamb and the lion lay down together. I want to see us, Black and white, Jew and Gentile, and everything in between. All people. I pray for all people every night. All people. That God will bless and enlighten and educate people, and that we can all be brothers and sisters.
I'm going to close with one question, but before I do that, I want to say that we are going to put the information for how to get Mr. Pernell's book on the BFSA website in the digital library. You can get that bfsa.ua.edu. And so we'll be talking about that, and I'm sure I have the recording up there as we've done with all the others. We will also look forward to Dr. Dunning's book at the beginning of the summer, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to chit chat with him about that. Dr. Dunning, is there anything that you want to say about or regarding Mr. Pernell's conversation, your experience with him, or anything that you want to add? We need you to unmute. Somewhere at the bottom, you should have a little microphone that says mute. Or if you hit your picture, a blue thing should come up that says mute, and you can hit that. No.
Dr. Dunn, if you were to look at the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there should be a microphone. You may have a red line going through it. If you would click on that, please. That was the video. Should be the icon next to that. Dr. Cassie, do you want to go ahead and just come back to him?
Okay.
Okay.
So here is my closing question, Mr. Pernell. At the end of this, you talk about being able to cheer for the Crimson Tide now and Hollow
Yes.
Tide. And
Yes.
I guess I just wanted to ask you what has brought you there. Has it been a a healing process, because you make reference to Vivian Malone Jones too, and her talking about at the graduation ceremony, you know, it takes time to heal from being
Right,
hurt.
right.
Yeah. And
Right.
so I guess I want to know, you know, do you feel like there's been some kind of reconciliation, and or what has gotten you there where you're able to re-embrace or embrace the University of Alabama and all that comes with that?
So
Cassandra,
I did a,
Oh,
can you hear me now?
yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
How do y'all want to do this? Do you want to answer the question and then have Dr. Dunning speak, Mr. Pernell, or you want to?
okay, I'll just end mine with this. To your question,
Okay.
I did a visual of a team photo in 2019. 9 out of 11 first team offensive players were Black. First team defense, 11 out of 11 were Black. And through the passage of time, coupled with the makeup of the team and seeing how Blacks are, even Black quarterbacks, and so that had been prohibited for so long. And so that made me, I guess, I never really thought about what that point was or how many years ago it was. But like I said, with John Mitchell and Wilbur Jackson, I never followed them. When I graduated from the University of Alabama in August of August 21st, 1970, 8 days later, I was on a Greyhound bus to Akron, Ohio, getting out of Alabama, as I went to U.S. Steel, give them credit, Corporation, with my degree in hand from the University of Alabama. And the guy told the interviewer, said, yeah, I'll hire you, but the only job is going to be a clerical job, and there's no room for advancement. So I hauled ass to Akron, Ohio, began work in another state. And I guess I took the advice of VC Botticelli, all your Black ass north.
I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. Dr. Dunning, did you want to make some comments? And
Sure.
then I'll go back and close out.
Well, first of all, let me applaud Mr. Pernell. I've known him since 1966, and his consistency has been something that I've always admired, and his book reflects that. And as he was talking, I thought about the times in 66 and 67 in Alabama. Given what's going on today, I really don't know how we survived that and did not get hurt. So
Right.
his book tells a story, and it's not a pretty story. It's a story that's grounded in reality. And as we try to reflect on this America of today, it has a birth that's decades and generations old. And so we have to become our own tellers of stories. And what we have is what he talked about earlier. You can't tell stories about us. We have to tell our story of what happened to us.
Yes.
I appreciate him doing that. And we lived right across the hall, and I was, in more cases than I can remember, thinking about my support of him because I had lived in East Asia for 2 years. I was a 22-year-old freshman, and I had had freedom of liberty to move around in East Asia. I had to come back to Jim Crow, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not interested in going back to anything that said you are not welcome. We just elbowed our way into everything that was on the University of Alabama campus. So I applaud him, I celebrate him, and I congratulate him for what he's done.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Wow. I can't even follow that up other than to tell you all, you will, this is a good read. It will bring you through many different emotions, really. I mean, there's discussion about, look, I'm your salesperson now. I want my 10% cut. But I mean, there's references to Django in here. And then, I mean, just, it goes across the board. And it's just an interesting read, and it seems to be, well, it is grounded in reality of the society in which we live, and in which those before us have lived. And so I strongly encourage you to get the book, Alabama Crimson Tide, 1967, and the Undercurrents of Integration, the first 5, before the season changed. Thank you so much. I am
Thank
honored
you.
to be in the presence of both of you. Mr. Pernell, Dr. Dunning, thank you for the contributions that you have made that allow us to be on UA's campus in this day and age, hopefully making it a better place for everybody. My regards to your wife, Chelsea, Mr. Pernell. I don't know what else to say other than I am honored and very appreciative of having had the opportunity to do this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I thank the BFSA, all its members. I thank Ken Gaddy from the Paul W. Bryant Museum for being a part of this and willing to promote that book. And that shows courage. And I thank
Yes,
him
it
so much
does.
for that. So
He's a
thank you
great
guys for
guy.
this opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
All right.
Everybody have a good night.
You too.